Breaking developments into the racist photo on Governor Ralph Northam's yearbook page. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Larry Miller. So right now we're talking about this picture that launched an investigation. How did this photo of a person in blackface next to someone wearing a KKK robe end up on the yearbook page of Virginia's future governor? And the question that everybody wants to know, is Ralph Northam one of the two people in this photo? 4 months of investigations have landed us to today where lawyers say that their results are inconclusive. Our Mike Valerio is down in Hampton Roads with the results. Mike?
Well, Larry, good afternoon. And of course, the main headline, as you just said, Virginia's Attorney General, the former Attorney General here, Richard Cullen, after 3 months of investigation, 110 days, could not say one way or another if Governor Northam is in that racist yearbook photo. But Larry, a point of the news conference that I thought was fascinating, which ended just a few moments ago, was that through the 35 years of yearbooks investigated here at Eastern Virginia Medical School, only one error was found in those 35 years worth of yearbooks. That was a mistake for a yearbook caption. An error was not found on either of Governor Northam's 1984 yearbook pages. So that would imply the photo in question there was not a mistake. But despite that finding, through again these 36 pages worth of findings, the former Attorney General and his team of investigators could not say one way or another because of poor photo resolution and a few other factors whether or not Virginia's governor is in that yearbook photo. Larry, of course, this all started back on February 1st when that photo emerged on a conservative news website, and the governor initially apologized for it, apologizing to the Commonwealth and much of the country as the outroar and outrage escalated within just a few minutes and hours. But important here, the team of investigators said nobody came forward and they could not find anybody who definitively said Governor Northam was in that photograph. Take a listen.
The governor himself has made inconsistent public statements in this regard. No individual that we interviewed has told us from personal knowledge that the governor is in that photograph, and no individual with knowledge has come forward to us to report that the governor is in the photograph.
Okay, and also we have one more important note before we go. This was also very much a news conference revealing a story that could have been, in the sense that the medical school here knew about this racist photograph all the way back when Ralph Northam was running for governor of Virginia against Ed Gillespie. And so many of us in the press corps were wondering, okay, if this photograph came out during the campaign season, could you imagine how different it would have been? The medical school said, frankly, Larry, they did not come out and say anything, even though they knew about this photo, because they wanted to stay out of the political arena. Larry?
All right, Mike Valerio reporting live in Hampton Road for us this afternoon. Mike, thank you. The investigation is over, but the controversy certainly is not. The Virginia Legislative Black Caucus is still calling for Northam to resign since he has admitted to wearing blackface in the past. For many, this issue is far from unresolved and unsettled. We'll continue to keep you updated on this story as it continues to develop.